Greetings, good people. Welcome to Who Knows It's Just Life, the podcast. I'm your host, Kyle. Thank you for fitting me into your day today. On today's episode, I'm joined by Toney. Now, Toney and I go way, way back. I first met Toney when he was in middle school, actually. My buddy Kenny and I had a nonprofit, and we taught Saturday school at Kip Will Academy. Yeah. And Toney and a few others that we're still in touch with still were seventh graders, I think. And I think we taught them again in their eighth grade year or whatever. And honestly, we've been friends ever since. We were teaching some music stuff, music production. But since then, I mean, we've been on how many hikes and bike rides, and just, you know, we've just been tight ever since. Matter of fact, we did the Spartan races a couple times last year. Yep. So, you know, it's really just been a beautiful friendship, you know, and just a dope relationship that started, you know, way back when. But anyway, welcome to the show. And if there's anything else you'd like to add to who you are, what you do, how you identify, feel free to do that.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here. Just me, Toney, African American, male, chilling, enjoying life, you know.
DC native?
You know, DC native all day.
Yeah, that's what's up. So, one thing I always say on the show, again, the show is called Who Knows It's Just Life, and I know you've heard a few episodes, but just to reiterate for anybody hearing this show for the first time, the show is based on the premise that I don't know, I'm still learning, and this show is just a public expression of that learning. You know, we can say things that we might disagree with 5 years from now, 10 minutes from now. It doesn't matter. I've said things on the show, and then like I later in the episode, like I was like, oh wait, I don't think I agree with that anymore. So it's completely fine. If I say anything that you feel like you need to check me on, it's a safe space to do that. So I just appreciate, you know, we can just have that back and forth, and we do this all the time when we talk anyway. So that's that's no problem.
Absolutely.
We just have mics in our face now. But so that's the thing. So I welcome you to the space, and just in terms of that, the other thing I like to do with guests is just to say, how are you doing? We're in December now, so how are you doing today, this week? How's this year going? However you want to answer that question, the floor is yours.
Absolutely, thank you. You know, it's getting close to Christmas, so you know everything. The holidays is becoming a big thing. Just communicating with my family, with my friends, just making sure that, you know, I get all the gifts taken care of for the little ones, and just, you know, making sure that, you know, Christmas is going to be good. Moving on to the New Year's. I think everything is moving in a good pace. I think so far for me, I moved to a new company. So I've been working there for the past 3 months. I've been having a blast there. And I'm also just transitioning, building more on certifications to build up on my UX UI design and on my project management work. So I think things are moving in a good progressive position. So yeah.
Cool. That's what's up.
Moving on to the end of the year, like, you know, I just turned 26, so things are moving. I'm moving out of the I guess the quarter life crisis. So things are moving good. Just recently this week have been it's been a very monumental time for me, and I say that because like this Wednesday was my elder's 80th birthday, and I made an effort to go and see him. He works at this place called Life Pieces, the Masterpieces, where he supports like almost, I believe it's about 100 to 150 black young boys, so that they can be, you know, able to emotionally interject their feelings and to be able to progress into modern day society. I think, you know, certain things that he has done for all of us, and I speak for myself, and I speak for, you know, my friends and family that came from Life Pieces, is very, like, you know, emotionally important for us as a black community. So that Wednesday I stopped by. I wasn't in the best mood, to be honest, because I was coming from a sense of feeling, I guess, a bit anxious or a bit frustrated in I guess in my term, because I'm like just moving to a new company. And it's my first time actually being in a company where it's just I'm the only black person. So it just made me think of it being, yeah, it's good. I don't want to give a condescending thought. Like I'm having fun at that company, but certain things just makes me feel like I need a little bit more black spaces. Talk to like. Be in communal with other African American men and women, and that was an opportunity to do that for the week. So I went to go and see him, and it was just peace. Like, and I guess what made it monumental was the fact that when I went to see him, it was amazing that not only he had his impact day, with friends and family, but he also had it with a lot of his students that came by to show respect to him. And I think hopefully at when I get around his age that I'm going to be sitting around a whole rack of people to love me, that I taught. So it was a very big Afrocentric moment for me to just turn around and be like, hey, even though I'm trying to, be more affiliated with American society, that I also have a bit of Africanness in me to continue moving forward. So it was great.
That's interesting. I know that's interesting. There's so much there that you just said, because I've been in the workforce for a bit longer than you, and most of my experiences are where I'm the only black person or one of few black people in my organization, and it's definitely a struggle. And I think it's beautiful that you had the opportunity to kind of where some African diasporic like love and energy was like injected into your week, despite this career change. And at the end of the day, I mean, we have to survive and learn to thrive in this system as it is, and it's not necessarily designed for us. I'm sugarcoating it. It's not designed for us. It's designed to harm us, in my opinion. And so I guess maybe that's a good question to just ask you directly. Like, with an elder like that, and with some coming of age experiences that sounded to be very Afrocentric, how has it been coming into the workforce and confronting the Eurocentric, individualistic, capitalistic, just the day-to-day reality of life in this country as an adult, with some of those Afrocentric coming of age experiences as a background?
That's an interesting question. I think that it's a lot different because my upbringing, and I believe that like getting around the age of 16, I have been around black people pretty much most of my life. And I say that as to like my elementary school, middle school, high school, a little bit of college, but like majority of my education and even with my elders as well have been very Afrocentric. And what I mean by Afrocentric is just communal based, like communicating with people, constantly, like, having fun. And I mean by just being able to connect with people that also engage in the same sense of traumas that are relative to like being a part of the black culture and being a part of black neighborhoods. And I think it was till now, like becoming an adult, like around, I think when I became 22, 23, I started engaging with more like diversity with people, which was really interesting because it took me till I actually went to college to start really engaging with white people. And wow. I think it was a bit of a blessing. I feel that having that upbringing with a lot of black folk kind of made me feel a little bit different as to how do I approach white people, or how do I approach other ethnicities. And as I started going up and started, working and had my like first career, like my first career started off working at a utility company, and they pretty much, it was mostly like Latino. So it was I would say I would say 85% Latino, and then everyone else was like either slightly black, a bit white, or Pakistan, or from different parts of the globe. So it was interesting. But then now I've transitioned to another job, and that job it's like 90 to 95% white, 5% Vietnamese, and like 1% black, being me. So it's very different, because it's like just cultural things. So to me, it's a bit different. It's really different to see certain things that you say, certain things that you do, it could be common to one group, but then when you say those same things to someone else, then it's like, should I say, should I not say?
And you mean in terms of when somebody says something that kind of like problematic, or kind of like
code switching?
Code switching.
So code switching, as in like I may say a certain thing that like I haven't seen you in a brick, and I could communicate that like that connotation, like exactly what I'm saying. But then when I communicate with someone else that may not know of that culture, they're like, I don't know what you mean. Right. So right. I guess that in turn made me feel a bit isolated, and then even American culture in itself, the fact that like a lot of its terminologies is to be of isolation. Like I've always hear like, it's lonely at the top, it's lonely at the top. It really made me want to become as self-made as possible, and I think that in turn started building a bit of anxiety in me. And I only speak of that, and I think that also stemmed as to why I felt so frustrated before I even went to go see my elder on his Impact Day. It was mainly because, I've been chasing a dream of becoming successful, but in the process of that success, in American standards, you have to be in silo. And I wondered about that, and how I communicated with, how I mingled with society, like as of now, had been of as an individual rather than as a collective, as I should have been,
And that idea of the collective, is that something that was taught in Life Pieces to Masterpieces, or
yes,
or and in other places? So yeah, can you talk more about that? Like how did it's? First of all, I just want to acknowledge and appreciate you saying that. The lonely at the top, the individual success, it brought on anxiety. Like I think that needs to be it's a very tapped in thing to identify within yourself. And I one of my earlier episodes a year or two ago, I was trying to make the argument that if we listen to our bodies, like we'll see signs that there's things about the system, things that it asks us to do that aren't healthy for us. And I think you just gave us an example organically just now, so I think that's a beautiful thing. But I want to jump back to, Life Pieces, and like, or anywhere else where that sense of community may have been part of success. So I guess so. Yeah, how was success spoken about in Life Pieces or in any other organizations you were a part of as a kid?
Yeah, so I think I did like the first question you brought about collective. So I'm gonna start with that, and then it will in turn revolve around success. So like collective, how Life Pieces express collective to me. In a way, it was more so of accountability. It was more so in a way of, communication and trust of what you are responsible for, you will commit to, and you have integrity in what you're doing. And it goes even, I believe it in a way, Life Pieces instilled it rather than initiate. I think as a child, since I was a kid, like my parents, or my mom at the time had a sense of urgency for me and my sister and my little brother to be able to, be each other's keeper. And that's where it started off. It started off as a collective where, you look out for each other because we're family. But then growing up in a lower economic, household and neighborhood, there were positive things that came from it, which was, being able to just run outside, have fun, if I wanted to play baseball in the alley, I played baseball in the alley. If I wanted to play Heelys, roll with the the little Heelys that they used to have to go on the sidewalks and whatnot, it'd be great. But the negative piece was, you had to take care of your family, and as a negative of being in a lower economic area, you always had to watch over your shoulder because you never know if someone will want to come and rob you, or someone will want to bring harm to either you or your sibling. So that kind of played a part in collective and how I chose people to be a part of my collective. And then going into life pieces, it transferred into more of an instillment where collective was not just your imminent family, but instead it was also comrades, friends that doesn't necessarily be of blood, and it may not also be of race. It would just be of a simple body, of a collective as a body of mind or mindset. And that stuck with me for a bit of time. But then as I grew older, I started to move slightly away from the collective as far as a pool of thought towards a common goal, and instead focus towards how fast can I make money. And success started to grow as a sort of collective. So I'm thinking of it as like a cone. Like a cone shape has just or like a funnel, where collective has this wide, rounded base, but then as you narrow into the top is fueled with success. And for me, collective and success played hand in hand, but the more I pushed to success, the more I started to not push for collective. The more I started to push, the more I started to push to success, the more I started to push towards just being an individual. Because the people that, and I love my friends to death, but certain friends that I, was with, it pushing for success pushed me to not want to be connected with them. And I felt a bit isolated in that regard. And
is that because they weren't on the same path, or they weren't making the same choices, or
they weren't making the same choices? They weren't on the same path, and and that encouraged me to not want to, keep a consistent communication with them. But I think in turn that kind of made me less interested to stick with the collective and focus on how soon can I get to the money.
Wow. One thing that I want to jump back to is you said when you were learning about the collective, it was the collective was the reason for integrity, for discipline, hard work, accountability, all of those things. And I think that's really insightful, because I think in the capitalistic mentality, we're taught that the market, money, those things are the things that enforce accountability, hard work, those things. But that's not necessarily money and markets and trade isn't necessarily the origin of those things. The origin of those things is the collective, because like you said, it started in your home with the family. You had a collective. It wasn't about money. It was just about survival. Unfortunately, because you were in a neighborhood where your personal safety was more at risk than others in other neighborhoods. So it was about survival. But it could also be about fun. You could go out and play some ball or whatever, right? So there was a collective piece. And I think it's really interesting to keep in mind that those principles of work, accountability, all those things you listed. I'm not gonna remember them all, but like those are core to us as people, both in family and in community, in our village, in tribe, or whatever. And I guess the thing that I feel like we might be missing as a society is how do we get those? How do we root those character traits and those values? How do we keep them rooted in community, and also have that translate into success? And I'm allowing for us to define success as communal success, not just because obviously you're talking about how success feels like it has to be individual, and that's what kind of it feels like it's pulling you away from what you've learned. And so I guess as I'm looking towards what we want to be building is like let's rename success in a way that's consistent with those character traits rooted in community, and have that success still be something achievable that we can all get to through those things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, like what you're saying kind of reminds me of that African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. You know, like that stuff makes a big difference, because you can easily go as fast as by yourself, but you know, how far can you really get without a collective, without a like-minded collective? That's different.
That's true. That's
true. You know, because you can be with a whole arc of people on the way to success, and that same group of people can tear you down just as fast.
That's
you
true.
know, so it's really an interesting balance and dynamic, and I think how I want to answer that question is really based off of the idea of what is like-minded. And to me, I think of a like-minded individual as someone where you have your same goals and plans to strive towards a common direction, and you have a friend or family member or ally that, you know, is maybe going through a different type of trauma, or a different type of stasis, but they're pushing towards that similar direction. Yeah. Like that is like-minded, and I strive to find like-minded people, or, you know, I strive to find people that are smarter than me, so that, you know, eventually I would be able to learn from them, and they're able to learn from me. And then to be able to build a great median as towards getting to a goal.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that played a big role in my life as far as just the collective, and how the collective felt more Afrocentric to me, and I liked it, and I liked that. Yeah. However, I struggled finding enough like-minded people to keep a positive collective, and in turn, moving into corporate America, it made me feel alone because of the lack of like-minded people with the same goal.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I feel you. That sucks. I feel you. Yeah, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, but I mean, I think, you know, I mean, I know I'm 26, so I think that, like, in the next 10 years, I'm probably going to find some like-minded people. And I'm not saying that the people that are around me don't have the same spirit as to finding success. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that, you know, it is interesting how you build connections with people, and it's interesting how, you know, you can create vehicles to build in wealth, and it's interesting in how you distribute that wealth, whether it be knowledge or monetary, to other people. And I you know, it makes me wonder, you know, how do you progress towards success with, you know, the likelihood of having a collective with you.
Yeah, that's true. And I think it, like you said, it's not necessarily an indictment on those who are in your life now. It part of it's just an activation of some of those principles. Like, you might have people in your life that might be down, but like you haven't maybe haven't had that conversation to like, all right, let's act on this. Let's like really like put our energy. Let's really extract this piece out of us and like really like apply it. and maybe just turning on that switch is part of it to get started, at least, you know. Are there any other pieces about your upbringing that stand out in terms of just important for shaping your life? When I think of you being 26, like, there were some key moments. I mean, you were young when, like, Obama was elected, for example, or just like pivotal moments of, like, police brutality, for example. Like, there's just so much that happened, and I was an adult for a lot of that, for all of the things I just mentioned. I guess as being that you were in high school for some of that, or middle school, high school, or in college or whatever, but just much younger than me, is there anything that sticks out in terms of your schooling specifically, and or what was going on in the world that kind of sticks out to you right now?
Yeah, sure. One thing that stuck out to me, and this is me, like, now looking back in my life. So I grew up in Northwest DC, and it was used to called Bloomingdale. I think it used to be called Bloomingdale. I think it's still Bloomingdale now, but it's a lot different.
I bet.
Around the year, I think between the year of 2000 to 2012, that was, like, really the gentrification hump in DC. And I remember, like, as a kid, I would I used to be called Scooter Boy because I always had my razor blade scooter. I take that thing out. I would just go ride my scooter everywhere, and everywhere was literally from my house on Northwest and riding up to Columbia Heights, and then going back to T Street, and, like, or, like, on Rhode Island. Like, I had a blast going up and down that street with my friends. But one thing that stuck out to me was that every time I went down, like, as if I was riding to Columbia Heights, was I would often see like abandoned bakeries, abandoned buildings that are in the way. I didn't often see too many, like, if anything, I only saw carryouts. Like, I didn't see too many, like, businesses in DC at the time, and I realized that, like, during that phase, DC was, like, considered Chocolate City, and there was a higher amount of black folk in DC, as opposed to what it is now. And I mean, I believe it's way more diversified. A lot more transient people are here now, but I bring that up because in that process, seeing the gentrification of houses just or neighborhoods just being renovated, and seeing, like, how slowly, as the years came around, I saw my friends start to move out because they couldn't really afford for the rent in the area, and also moving to like my family when we had to move. It was a really pivotal point in my life because it made me have a slight sense of aggression to society, because I felt that there were certain things, like losing our home because we just couldn't afford it, and even still, like, picking up a job that encouraged us to make better roads for for people that were not native to DC. It made me feel a bit frustrated and a bit angered by the fact that I had to move out because of gentrification.
Yeah, and to see the added resources that are coming in now that you and your friends are moving out.
Right, and
it kind of shows a little bit of the value, like where society's placing its value.
Right, and I believe that, you know, around that time when I was, like, at least, like, 8 to 12, that, you know, at that time frame, a lot of the businesses were being literally, like, I mean, I would consider it as the businesses weren't any businesses in DC at that time, you know, and you had black folk just, doing what they can with what they had. And then now it's like, like where were the resources then? Was that a sense of redlining? I don't know. And it really made me furious. And so, like, I think that played a big role in how I am now, because I'm like very adamant about just making sure that, wherever I go, I have an idea of the ecosystem there. I have an idea with what I need to do in order to survive there. Going throughout that portion, I moved from Northwest, and we ended up living in Oxon Hill, Maryland, and then we moved from Oxon Hill, Maryland to Southeast DC, and then I stayed in Southeast, Northeast for pretty much most of my life. I'm still in Northeast, and I think that shaped my life a lot, because being in Southeast, I lived over in Eli Place. Still same thing, you walk from the metro of Minnesota Ave, and you walking on the way home. For some odd reason in high school, like McKinley Tech had this beef of some sort with Friendship Collegiate, and I would go home, though where my house, where my apartment was like at least 2 or 3 blocks from the metro. So when I get off the metro, I will walk like 2, 3 to 4 blocks to the apartments. And every time I will walk, there will always be someone that will want to pick, because of the uniform or whatever. And it encouraged a bit of hostility in me, because growing up there, I always had to be mindful of my surroundings. And then even more so, gunshots would be almost every other day. So you would really be mindful of your surroundings. You going outside, making sure the timing when you would go outside. You would never catch me out there like, after 2 or 3, unless I had something to actually do. And then, like, moving from Eli, we went to Mayfair Mansions, and we lived there for about 3 or 4 years. And that was an interesting thing to me. And I think that was an important piece in my life, because living in Mayfair Mansions kind of represented a lighter piece to Collective. So, like, Collective, if Collective was a person, Collective sat in the back seat of my life, because in each and every situation, I had a relationship where I loved it and hated. I loved it, I hated. I loved it, I hated. What I mean by that love and hate of Collective was, I loved Collective starting off because when I was with Life Pieces, and this was when I was 14, like around 13 or 14, I had a great time understanding Collective in the Afrocentric way. They spoke a lot about African history, African mythology. They spoke about African philosophers. They spoke about African American history. They spoke about African Americans or American Africans that put in their thoughts into existence in our society as scholars, and that embodied a lot of my existence, and I felt proud of it. And moving forward in high school, my sense of Collective became parallel, because there was a body of knowledge that I knew, but not, some of the friends that I had an understanding of that. And they were kind of rooted in just trying to make sure that, either it was just like trying to meet the status quo at the high school or whatever, it's just high school. But the bottom line is, in high school, I didn't build Collective. I started to move further away from Collective, only because I felt like, the information that I was providing, people weren't really listening to, nor did I really want to express myself any further if you didn't understand what I was saying. Mm-hmm. So that kind of put me into a more of an independent stage. But going to Mayfair Mansions, and the reason why it became interesting dynamic was because I started meeting people that had a sense of like mind, and it gravitated to become something where I felt like a collective there. So Mayfair Mansions, just a quick history, Mayfair Mansions is pretty much the hood. And at that time, it was like at least 2 or 3 years before it was considered a very like notorious space. Mayfair Mansions, like J Street, it was a location where, it was a one way. And at that point in time, the history of that neighborhood was, if you drove into J Street, you would drive in with the inclination like you knew exactly what you were doing. Because if you didn't and you were stuck there, then 9 times out of 10 you would be in a you would be in a bad situation, I guess. Just but for me to be there, I knew that, and I felt within myself, because I've always been in poverty, so that didn't really bother me too much. But there was this one time where I met this guy, and this guy is an older cat. One day I was walking through the courtyard on my way to school, because at this time I was gravitating, I was a junior, senior year in high school, and this dude was playing chess in the courtyard, and I was like, "Hey, you playing chess, So I stopped by. Old dude, man. I sat down, and of course I asked. He was like, "Come on, play chess." And we played chess. He beat me 2 or 3 times, and then he laughed at me. And I took it because it was like, damn, you good. But he told me his story. His story was, he'd been in jail for about 25 years. He came out, and majority of the things that he does now is he takes his time. When he comes outside, he gets his cigarettes, he sells his cigarettes, and he does chess. And so every time I sit down and I talk to him, I started to build more of a connection, more of an understanding as to in the old, just listening to wisdom from an older person, and participating in that, and that started to build more of a collective. The more I started to hang around him, the more I started to hang around other people that were in the courtyard. Because typically, for me, I'm an introvert. So for social interactions, it requires energy from me. So collective is a love-hate relationship, because I don't necessarily like to be social. But in turn, I do enjoy having collective and being around like-minded people. So I think through that scenario with Mayfair Mansions, and then moving to a place by myself, became a sense of it became different. And I think it became different because as an adult now, and working in corporations where it's not so many black people, it felt a bit shocking because I've been around black people so much, and so the collective piece started to go down, because for me, and this is something that I'm still working with, that I still associated collective as to people of your race, like-minded people of your race, instead of like-minded people of other races, where you're from, So it's interesting. It is interesting.
Yeah. So when you talk about these things, what's coming up for me is that this isn't in school. Life Pieces, that sounds like that was a separate organization you were affiliated with, right? So as gentrification and housing displacements, things like that are big terms that people are using, and as kids, we probably we don't know that those are the names of what they are, but you're experiencing them. I'm curious, in school, when you learn about civil rights and you learn about these other movements, how did it feel learning about those things, and were those things connected to what you were experiencing in real time?
I think for the civil rights movement, I am honored by the fact that the civil rights movement made such an impact for African Americans. I believe that there are some things that had brought to attention of the court that provided opportunities for us to do certain things. But I feel like for the civil rights movement, it should be a nonstop thing. It should be a case where there's so much more to be done. But at that time frame in high school, civil rights movement was more of a piece of literature to read about. And because it felt like a piece of literature to read about, and like certain scholars of that time had been either assassinated or have gone, it made me see that as a piece of history. And the conventional piece became more of how can I socially communicate activism, or how can I socially project views of activism through social media. And I think around that time, I was starting to get into Facebook, and I noticed that, as far as civil rights is concerned, it wasn't the front end of my life. It was more so of like, because I know it as it's the history of my people, as it's the history of my, of my community, that I needed to know it. But it didn't feel like something where I needed to direct my attention to make things happen, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so basically it felt like something to learn and read about as a thing that happened, and not something that's happening where there's still movements and activism and work to be done continuously.
Yeah, and I mean, I can speak with the benefit of the doubt that, like, for me, I was not an extremely like exposed type of person. Like, I have my own bubbles where where my focus is to like focus on school, making sure I get my grades, having my own adolescent like type of trying to figure out how to get the girls, trying to figure out the last thing on my mind was thinking of civil rights at that time. But still, my parents didn't really instill that. Like I'm never like expected to go home and my mom would talk about like, hey, what do you know about Marcus Garvey, or what do you know about Malcolm X? Like my parents weren't really like that.
Yeah.
But still, it was important to know that information just to know, rather than it was being, okay, be considered an activist. And for me, there, like growing up, honestly, as far as activism concerned, I didn't even start protesting until I was like maybe in college, like in my 18, like when I was 18 or 19. So I didn't really do too much protesting or do too much activism in high school. I mainly was just, doing what I can. And because I knew what I knew from, other experiences, other educational experiences, it gave me a push to direct it when it was necessary.
Yeah. And I don't think there's anything wrong with, not everybody's parents are going to push that kind of stuff, and that's perfectly fine. Everybody's trying to survive and make it in their own right? So everybody's doing the best they can. And so and obviously when you're a kid, obviously there's a huge social dynamic, learning who you are as a young man, and then, dating and all that kind of stuff. Everybody's doing that. So that's definitely part of that experience. I just think as somebody who's a bit older, I feel like this is a good sanity check for us as adults. And you're an adult now too, so you're old enough to be a teacher, right? So like now it's us who are supposed to be the ones teaching young people. And I guess the feedback from me and my generation and those older than me who were responsible with your curriculum and teaching you, there was a failure there, because there was an opportunity to connect the civil rights movement of the past with the housing displacement, the gentrification that you were literally living through in real time, and also with like the food deserts and redline and all those other things that were undoubtedly part of your experience. Like there was a failure in the ability to connect those two, and to, in the midst of all the other things you're learning about being a young man, like making sure that those seeds were planted and potentially watered, so that when you got to college, you had even that much more context for when you finally did get to protest. So, if I may, what were the things that you protested when you did start to actually take part in that?
So the things that I protested, and I have to say this to give a bit of context as well. Like, there was a time where, and I know you recall like the time in Flint, Michigan, where there was an issue with the water, and it became like not drinkable. I mean, you could barely shower with that water, and pretty much if Flint, Michigan was kind of stranded, and at the time I was working as an intern, working at an urban farm for UDC, and so at that time I went to Flint, Michigan with about maybe 4 or 5 people, and we went up there with just like, we had like 2 or 3 caravans of like water. We went over there just to, because we wanted to, and we just gave them water and gave them, as in like the residents at Flint, Michigan, water of what we could provide, that's awesome. And communicate with them in that regard.
Yeah.
But I bring that up because when communicating with them, they started to open my bubble as opposed to what I've been taught, as well as what I'm seeing. Because at that time, gentrification didn't register to me.
Right.
It was just aggression and anger because I had to leave.
Right. You just knew how it felt to. Right.
Right. I knew how I felt at that point in time, but I wasn't fully 100% aware of what was exactly going on until like college. And I think at that time when, I went outside of my comfort zone, because honestly, like, going to Flint, Michigan, that's like I don't often leave DC. So it's like going to another city, which it felt like home when I went there. It felt like what it felt. It felt the same as when I grew up in DC, where there was a bit of abandoned places. Like, I went to Flint, Michigan, it was a bit of abandoned homes because people left, in terms of survival. And when I got back from Flint, Michigan, it then made me become more, focused on protests, because it was disrespectful how that occurred. So the first couple protests that I went to, one of them was, and I don't know why this is the first thing that comes on my mind, but one of the first protests that I went to was like the Dreamers protest, where this was more related to second generation immigrants, and they were doing this protest just to be able to stay in America in the process, without them having to be
deported. The Dreamers as a path to citizenship and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. So, I protest for that, and then I protested for some of the movements for Black Lives Matter, and those things invigorated me to want to be a part of another collective of like-minded people, to focus on a direction to find change in society. But every time I've left a protest, I felt like it was just a sense of feeling rather than a sense of change, I guess, if that makes sense. And I wondered about that, because it was like, every time I come back, I felt happy that I did it. I felt passionate that I did it. But did I see change afterwards? And I'm not entirely sure if I saw change in every front, It felt more of a recreation afterwards rather than an actual body of movement for change.
Yeah, I feel you. I protested a bit when I was in college as well, and that was a different time. But I had that same feeling, and I think looking back, I think it's okay to feel that way, But it's also true that the protests in and of themselves are part of a momentum, part of a movement, and just those boots on the ground says something, and it builds momentum for future things to come, even if nothing immediately changes as a result of that action. And I think we've seen some of that coming out of Trayvon Martin. You had Black Lives Matter and stuff like that, and Michael Brown and all those. Like each. There's been many landmark situations where the momentum is just built and built and built and built, and then 2020 was just huge, with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and the others. Like, I mean, that was just an unprecedented amount of activity, but it took all of the activism leading up to that to get to that point. I think it's all related. So even if one particular protest you went to didn't feel like it was doing much, I still think it mattered in the broader context. But I feel you, because I felt the same way when I left protests when I was doing it too. Like, in that moment, like, you feel the passion, you're there, you're loud, you're doing anything, and then at the end of the day, it's like, okay, now what?
And that's the thing, I think, and what you brought up was a great point, that the fact that, for protests, the biggest goal is to see the collective of people that want to make a change, like, right. Because I believe everyone wants to see change in some regard, but it takes a level of push for someone to want to actually be active in these days. And I say that because it's like, with the emergent amount of, accessibility to technology, internet, to, see things on a regular basis. Even for myself, like, I think because there was such a larger influx of technology or access to the internet, it made me not only put myself in a bubble, but it made me be able to personalize my bubble, so that if there was, like, let's say, because I would listen to global news podcasts all the time, and from time to time I believe that because I heard so much craziness on the news, or I heard so much craziness going on around the globe, that it would just make me want to desensitize.
I've been there too.
Yeah, and just desensitizing from those things also make you desensitized from your own things. But it's like, I've always felt like, until it happened directly to me, I wouldn't actually make a move or make a decision. And I thought that was interesting too, because it's just like, I believe protest has a sense of power, other than it being theatrical, or other than it being, and I'm saying these words because it's like, protest isn't focused to be theatrical. It's not focused to be cinematic. It's focused to show a movement, to show a change. And right. I believe in that holistically. But one thing that I noticed that, because there's so much access to technology, is that it feels like being desensitized from a lot of the negative things that happen in the world just pushes me personally to not want to protest as often. And if anything, it pushes me to want to find other ways to protest, whether it be like a bit disruptive in a higher status form, how I communicate on a corporate scale. It is a really interesting thing that could be dissected a bit more.
Yeah, I think that whole trajectory of activism is very common. I think it's interesting how, especially when we're younger in college, like that activism, that fervor is there for that passion, and then it seems to kind of change forms for some, for many maybe, as we get older, or as we want to see change in ways that require other tactics, and so we kind of shift our perspectives a little bit accordingly. I want to jump back to life pieces and some of your earlier. So we talked about the collective as opposed to individualism and all that. Was there anything about life pieces, and any other organizations or anything else you were doing that kind of contributed to the activist energy and or just your experience in doing any kind of direct service, direct action work?
Definitely. So what I've explained before, like about the dreamers, and that was a little bit later in my adolescence, and with life pieces, and this starts to dive kind of. We're jumping back and forth in my life, but like
That's all right.
This jumps more so in the 15, 16 phase. In this 15, 16 phase, I was really active. And the reason being was because from life pieces, and more so because of the mentors that I had at the time. They pretty much projected a lot of information that I didn't really know, that my parents didn't really share, or that I didn't really have too much access to, like African mythology, African principles, African proverbs, different ways of African dress, a lot of exposure to Afrocentric knowledge, and a lot of exposure to how we incorporate African American men in American society. And in turn, that created me to want to become more of an activist, because it embodied the sense of frustration from the gentrification phase, and turned it into something where I can make use of it. And what I mean by that is, it considered, at that time, I felt that, and I'm being honest here, transparent, that like at that point in time, I considered African American like black people as superior, and I represented, like, I had a love for the idea of kings and queens in the African community, and I loved the idea because it embodied a sense of power, it embodied a sense of triumph, it embodied a sense of respect, a sense of nobleness to it. And it was an interesting thing, because the more I dived into African culture, and the more I started to feel proud about being an African American, the more I started to feel a bit condescending when it came to the diversity of other ethnicities. One that kind of brought that at a head was an ex-girlfriend at a time, where she was biracial. She was half white, half black, and she pretty much kind of pulled me in a different direction, because at that time, you know, I was just so into my blackness, and I did not open exceptions to how I felt about other races. And mind you, 15, 16, I was around 95 to 98% black people all the time. So my exposure and connecting with people outside of that was little to none, unless I like had a full field trip somewhere or
Michigan or something.
Yeah, right. Or I like literally pushed myself to go out there, you know?
Yeah.
And so at that time was very interesting to me, because I never heard of this term. It was called being a hotep, like being a hotep, man. And to me, and like my friends would crack at it, and they were like, "Oh, you're such a hotep," and I'm like, "What does that mean? Like, why is that a bad thing?" And this is why I was feeling that way, because I'm like, Hotep is a philosopher, an African Imhotep, right?
Name.
Exactly. Like he was a multi-genius.
Yes.
In African history.
Yes.
So I'm like, if you're calling me at that time, I'm like, if you're calling me Hotep, I'm like,
thank you.
Like that's a compliment. Like I appreciate that. But at that time, it was a term. It was a negative term, and so
still is.
Right. And so like the more I started to read, the more I started to understand that, like, I at that time didn't feel like I was an extreme like I was extreme like black nationalist, I guess, if that's a
one way to
word.
put it, yeah.
You know, and I had fixed views as to how I expected people to live, and even more so, my ex, she also, you know, shared that she has some family members who were lesbian, and mind you, my upbringing was like literally around heterosexual men and women. Homosexuality of any kind was always considered as like a sense of denial. My family is Christian based, so majority of the time when you bring homosexuality in any way in the conversation, it's always like, oh my God, like disgusting, or it's considered as if like, you know, I can hear my uncles now around the table if they hear something about, you know, their children or maybe their niece or nephew thinking about homosexuality, then there will be physical violence to make sure that is being beat out of them, you know.
Wow.
And so
Wow.
coming from that upbringing and going into that relationship with her, it was an interesting one because me now starting to get a better understanding as to communicating with, you know, her family members that were lesbian, I didn't know how to communicate with them. I would treat them as a guy, but I would treat them as a guy, but then they would be a little bit like standoffish about it. And then I would try to like, you know, I would still be chivalrous sometimes and would open the door and they would look at me crazy like, why you open the door for me, you know, or try to get their back, and then I would just be confused. And I say that, you know, just forgiving myself in my youth.
Sure.
But I know that a lot of my diversity started to change. I was blessed to be able to like build such foundations of Afrocentric truth and Afrocentric love for self. But then over time, I started to dive more into DC, the city of the melting pot. And it really made me more exposed to different nationalities, made me exposed to different sexual orientations, made me exposed to different races. It was completely confusing. But over time, after just learning more, and my ex, she first had issues with Hotep, man, and I guess became that. I'm not embodying it. I'm not. But I know that there was a sense of misogyny that I inherently picked up. There was a sense of nationality that I needed to refine a little bit better for myself. And it also made me really rethink how I communicate with the LGBTQ community.
Yep.
And I bring that up because like there was a question that was asked, and I remember that. I think this was a conversation between me and my ex related to her family member, because I didn't know how to communicate with her. And so she said, do you think, and I'm not going to use her name, I'm just say Kayla, like her cousin. I'll just say Kayla. So she asked me, do you think Kayla can be a king? And in my mind, I'm like, no, like absolutely not. And she was like, why? And whatever decision that I had, I think I just said something like, I don't think she could be a king because there is phenotype principles that represents being a king, that there is like, you know, you supposed to, you know, like being a king has a representation of being like the protector, being the provider, like having those connotations that are more masculine than it is feminine. And we
Right.
had a long conversation
I
after
bet that was a conversation.
You know, yeah, because I mean, to be honest, like that
She grilled your ass for that.
right, she did, and I respect it. And that grilling at that time, of course, if you're in a heated argument like myself, I don't like to lose, so I wasn't going to accept it. But it was a really good point, because it was then starting to become the turning point of how I viewed the LGBTQ community, and that made me want to go to this. So like about a month later, there was this I want to say conference where you had people who sat up on the board, and they were, different sexual orientations. They were there were homosexual men, lesbian women, there was a queer woman, there was a non-binary woman, there was a transgender woman. And from time to time, like I sat and I just listened. I sat and I listened, and I wanted to take some time to just really understand. I really wanted to understand what is the experience. What is the experience? Who are they as people? Or who are they, how did they consider themselves in society? And it helped me learn a lot about how to communicate as well as navigate and understand them as, a part of my life. Mm-hmm. And so furthermore, that kind of pushed me to think of protesting differently. And it only was because of the fact that, like, being able to build better connections with people outside of my own race, I started being able to connect, on a more, I guess, sacral level, to project and protest for rights that are outside of, my race, my race.
That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you sharing all that, because those are all very necessary and healthy journeys to take through life, really. And I'm glad that you had folks in your world that were able to mold you, shape you, and pull you out of certain lines of thinking, and then open you up into other lines of thinking and whatever. And I think you deserve a lot of credit too, and I've always said you're extremely mature, and you're just one of the smartest people I know for this. But you are very reflective just in your nature, and you always, like I said, like you said, in an argument you're gonna want to win, but like you are gonna stop and think about it, and if something made sense, it's gonna make sense, mm-hmm. and you're gonna give it credit, credit where credit is due. I have so many thoughts about some of the things you said, but yeah, the whole Hotep thing, like I definitely skirted around Hoteps a lot in my younger life, college, like out of college, whatever. And, I think, first of all, I can't stand the term, because like you said, Imhotep is a historical figure that should be on the dollar bill, or money. Like there should be a Hotep, an Imhotep museum or whatever. Like forget George Washington or whoever, these slave owners. Like that is an individual.
Right. It should be an award named after him.
And I just think it's just such a sense of bitter irony or whatever. It's just a tragedy that his name is now used for I would say a problematic section of black men, black male folks who take what is a beautiful sense of self-knowledge, self-worth, self-determination, self-history, mythology, all the stuff that you were mentioning that you learned. Those are all beautiful things. Mm-hmm. But what makes folks a quote-unquote Hotep is when it becomes misogynistic, when it becomes homophobic, transphobic, all of those things, and it just loses. To me, it loses credibility, because if you understand what ancient Kemetic people, which is to say ancient Egyptians, knew about energy and all those things, like they're missing part of what they're claiming, in my opinion. And I'm glad that you had that experience, and I'm also glad you were able to like move out of it too. Like, like I said, I've been around hoteps too, and my brother even said, man, you, like he was like, man, you could have been a hotep. I'm like, yeah, I was around. I was around him, and I was my spidey senses were like, well, hold up, I don't agree with this part right here though. Hold up. So yeah, so I appreciate you sharing that, and I'm glad that you felt comfortable sharing that, because that's a good. It's just tough, man, because I feel like Black people we and I keep going back to this. None of this was in school.
Yeah,
none of this was
exactly.
in school. So for Black people, we are searching for identity. We're searching for. I mentioned this in terms of my trip to Ghana. We talked about this, like the idea of like, where's home, even like physically, where is it safe for me to be a Black person, where my body isn't threatened, where I'm culturally included and I feel belonging. And you can't say that. You can't say that you're fully perfectly safe here in the States. Culturally, you have to learn a few things if you go anywhere else. But anyway, so what Life Pieces did for you was a beautiful thing. The rooting yourself in Afrocentric philosophy, Afrocentric ideals, that's what we need. We need our children to go through rites of passage and things like that ground us in a strong sense of our Blackness, and not even just Blackness, like any culture should do this, right? Like, and I mean, I know folks who are Korean, they went to Korean school, they learn Korean or whatever, or do what makes you, like do what your tribe does. You know what I'm saying? Like be fully rooted in who you are and who your tribe is as your people. And then go out into the world with not only your respect of self, but also the respect that other people can do things differently. And that's okay, as long as they're not harming anybody else. Right. And I think it's great that you got to that point. And it's interesting because way earlier in the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned like now at work, you're working with white people more than ever before. Mm-hmm. And I've had the debate, and it's kind of a dumb debate because it doesn't really matter, whether or not like the HBCU experience is a formative thing for folks who come from diverse. Really, HBCUs are great no matter what. Like for anybody for multiple reasons, but I particularly, as a person who came from a bit of diversity in my community, an HBCU would have been nice because it would have been that rooted, that centering in Blackness that I didn't have. Really, I didn't have it in my home because I mixed. So culturally, there was just a lot going on. And I didn't have it in my community organically either. So an HBCU experience would have given me that at that point. But maybe it's even better at the elementary school phase. And not to say that it's better. Like I just feel like it should happen at some point, and I'm glad that you had it, because that's a beautiful thing. Because we should feel confident and rooted in who we are as people, and then that enables us to healthily navigate the rest of the world. I feel like part of the problem with white people is that they feel like they're under threat all the time because they're not rooted in any particular culture. Like most white people are descendant of someone from somewhere in Europe, and they lowered that flag, put up the Stars and Stripes, but there's not a whole lot of culture behind the Stars and Stripes other than capitalism, colonialism, and Thanksgiving, and like
right.
burgers on July 4th, and just like I don't know, it's such a new country. There's not a whole lot of culture. There's not a whole lot of stuff there. So I feel like whiteness has this insecurity of like, well, I don't even know who I am. I'm white and I'm American and damn it, that's the best thing in the world, And it's that quick because there's not much to it, frankly.
Right.
And those of us around, and you could pick up a white person, you could interview a white person from France, and they're white, but they have a ton of understanding of what it means to be French, and even and whatever. I'm digressing, but like I feel like everybody should just have that experience where they're rooted in who they are, rooted in their tribe, and their whatever, and then that kind of just is a beautiful thing once we kind of expose ourselves to others. But anyway, I digress. That there's a lot that you mentioned that I really feel. I'm glad that you shared all of that, and I'm glad that you got to the point you're at now, and I know the journey only continues, man. I mean,
absolutely. I mean, and I think you've shared a lot of good points as well. Like, okay, so starting off, I do think from the initial point of Hotep, like honestly, the reason why I bring up Hotep, I entertain it. I entertain the word Hotep because I don't fully embody the thought process of, someone considering someone that loves African culture as being a misogynistic prick. I do think that there are people that love themselves as an African American man and is able to be diverse and to adaptively communicate and respect other races.
Yeah.
There is a saying where no one is better than I, and also I am no better than anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And in turn, that means there is a balance. There's a balance. There's an ecosystem where you can be the best that you can possibly be and also have a sense of respect that someone else can be the best that they can possibly be. That doesn't necessarily have to make you feel like you have to, be less than someone. That superiority, inferiority, hierarchy, Darwinism type of stuff is not really necessary. And the classifications of things aren't really necessary, especially nowadays. I know we're diving into like different things, and I know like one of the things that me growing up, I dived into different cultures really really interestingly. Like I dived into more cultures in my last job, because there was just, even though it was majority Latino, it was a lot of other variations of races. Like you pretty much had the entire rainbow there. Like you had white, you had someone from Pakistan, you had someone from Ethiopia, you had someone from India, you had someone from Russia, you have someone from Salvador, from Ecuador, from Colombia, and then it was just me and this older lady that was from here in DC, And I remember there was a time where we had this annual like potluck where everyone brings their dish from their home.
Culture. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, from their home. And you had people from Portugal too. So I even remember like everyone's around the table talking about, what type of dishes they're going to bring. And then I go over and I'm like, hey, you want to bring some chicken and mumbo sauce? Because the only thing I can really think about as far as a dish,
a DC thing,
a DC dish is like, what, mumbo sauce? Like, then would you put mumbo sauce? Chicken or some fries, And we had a great laugh. Because like DC is kind of like, other than go-go music, DC is very diverse. And there's a lot of things that kind of diversified it so much that you can't really know like what's a national thing other than its music and its like accent and culture. I feel like for culture is something that you embody at a really young age, so that you already had time to marinate yourself in your culture, that you can move on with other cultures.
I agree.
And for me, I feel like I started later. I feel like it took me till I was like maybe 14 or 15 to start understanding more about my culture.
Yeah. And
that lapse of time, I lost at least 12 to 13 years of not really understanding my culture. So now it's kind of me having to still figure it out now. Like, I think I think it's so important to be able to know yourself, by the age of, know yourself means to me, have a sense of understanding of where your ancestors came from, have a sense of understanding as to what they have done in their lives. And I mean that as like ecosystem wise, as monetary wise. It doesn't have to be specific stories, but to just have an understanding of what they have done so that you can know what you come from, what stock you come from, and create, building blocks towards what you want to do later down the road.
Yeah.
Overall, it is important to know who you are going into society, because once you go into society, it's kind of you're on a slate or a path to focus on what you need to get done. I mean, I think focusing on what you need to get done and also focusing on who you are as a person, it's kind of hard to bridge a gap towards success.
Yeah.
Or communal success.
Yeah.
Because how can you build community if you don't know yourself first?
Exactly. No, for sure. For sure.
So,
yeah, man.
Yeah, man.
Well, I appreciate you sharing. This has been a wonderful conversation. I know we could keep going for a lot longer. But in the interest of time, I think we can conclude this version of it right here. And I definitely think there's plenty of fodder for another conversation. One thing I always do when I close out episodes with a guest is I ask a couple of questions. The first of which is, what is the last book that you read that you recommend?
The last book that I read is the Book of Ishmael. And
we didn't even finish talking about that.
We didn't.
Ooh, that could be another whole episode.
Oh man, yes, it will.
Oh wow.
Speaking to existence, yeah, the Book of Ishmael is a book that I would recommend because it's a really interesting philosophical book.
I'm glad you liked it, and I want to keep that. I'm gonna pin that one there because we can definitely talk more about that. Another whole show about that one later. I love that book. I'm glad you read it. That's Ishmael by Daniel Quinn. All right. What superpower would you have?
The superpower that I'll have, or that I feel like I already have, is adaptability.
You're the first person that says I already have this one.
Oh yeah.
Nobody said they already had the superpower they want. That's
Shoot.
what's up. Adaptability. I like that.
Yeah, man. I mean, I honestly think powers is stuff that you can create. I feel like we are beings of creation, so why not? Why not have a superpower? It may be a common superpower, but it is a power.
That's a beautiful thing. I love that. Thank you. That's dope, man. That's what's up. The last one is, what song are you rocking to right now?
Song I'm rocking to. Oh, that's such a difficult question, man. I've been rocking to a lot of music lately. So okay, I ain't gonna lie. I'm kind of a moody person. I like listening to moody music. I've been listening to a lot of Brent Faiyaz lately. So his new album Wastelands, I've been listening to that. It's really melodic, and I like the cinematic skits that are in it. I think one of the songs that I like from it is called Bad Luck.
Bad Luck?
Yeah. So it's a very resolutional song of him communicating with his significant other about what he has done and trying to make up for it.
Cool. That sounds good. I'm not familiar with that one. I gotta check it out. All right, man. I appreciate it. The last question, the actual last question is, if you would like for anybody to reach out to you in any way or just follow you on whatever, is there any contact information or Instagram or any social media you would like folks to is there any social media or anything you'd like to put out here for folks to get in touch with you? You don't have to, but I just offer that.
Oh, good. I mean, you can see me on IG, Mr. Toney Tone. Feel free to drop a DM, or if you want to further the conversation there, feel free to talk. Send me a message. If you feel like maybe some of the information that I've shared was a little bit contradictory, which it could have been, or maybe controversial, just shoot a message. I don't mind responding.
Yeah, and that goes with me too. I mean, I always say after every show, hit me up on Instagram or whatever, DM me or whatever, just because this show is about that learning process. So we've talked a lot about your growth and talked about ideas that you had, ideas that have changed and whatever. And that process will continue to happen for both of us. And this show is just, like I said in the beginning, it's a public expression of that learning process. And so, yeah, hit us up. If we said something that was like, oh, nah, you got that wrong. Oh, blah, blah, blah. Hit us up. Let's have that conversation. And we could have you on the show talking with us on rehashing whatever it is that hit you funny or whatever. We can. This is that kind of show. So we'll definitely welcome any feedback. Yeah. All right, man, Toney. I appreciate you joining me on the show.
Absolutely, man. I'm happy to be here, man.
Cool. Well, Yeah, that concludes the show, everybody. I appreciate you fitting us into the day to day. As always, you can get at me on Instagram at realdadult. That's REALDADULT. And as I just mentioned, you can get at me about this episode, any prior episodes, or if you have any ideas for future episodes, you can holler at me there and tell me about that as well. Hope to catch you here next time. Until then, be safe, be well, peace.
It's Just Life podcast is recorded, produced, and edited by me. All thoughts and views expressed on the show represent that moment in time. Participants have the right to be wrong, learn, and reshape their ideas as the journey through life continues. Please remember to like this episode if you haven't already. Subscribe to the show on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And as always, thank you for listening.